In the remote village of Enz, nestled between dense forests and rolling hills, lived a woman named Adama, whose beauty was whispered about in every hut and marketplace, yet whose mind was as cunning as the serpent that slithered through the river reeds. Married to the stern but respected farmer, Kofi Adama felt the stirrings of discontent, not because her husband lacked provision or care, but because her restless heart longed for power and control over the villagers' perception of her. So she devised a subtle plan to ensnare a wealthy trader who occasionally passed through the village, weaving rumors about a mystical charm hidden in their home, a charm that could grant prosperity, all the while knowing that Kofi's rigid sense of honor would compel him to protect the village's sacred secrets, a tension that thrilled her as she manipulated glances and whispered words in the market, planting seeds of intrigue in the minds of those who had never seen her husband smile. Yet, in her careful plotting, Adama failed to notice the quiet observance of her neighbor, Nana A, an elderly woman whose eyes had seen decades of greed and folly, and whose presence in the shadows became a mirror to Adama's own schemes, reflecting the subtle cracks in her plan even as the sun rose over the ochre roofs of Nzuri and the smoke from cooking fires mingled with the morning mist, carrying the scent of roasted yams and ripe mangoes, scents that masked the brewing storm within her own household. For, as Adama rehearsed her deceptions, moving silently past the sleeping Kofi to leave a trail of staged evidence for the traitor to discover, she did not realize that every step she took toward her ambition also drew her closer to the unraveling of her own carefully constructed illusion. And by the time the traitor arrived, guided by the stories she had meticulously sown, the village itself seemed to hold its breath, the trees swaying as if whispering warnings, the river murmuring secrets of a woman who had sought to master fate, but who, in her blind pursuit, had already begun to entangle herself in a snare invisible to all but the patient eyes of Nana Ama, whose knowing smile hinted that the trap was far more intricate than Adama could imagine. For in the dance between desire and consequence, the first threads of a reversal had begun to weave themselves into the fabric of her life, a reversal that would test her wit, courage, and the very heart of the village that watched silently as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and caress the steps of the woman who thought she could command destiny, yet whose own steps were already measured by forces she could neither see nor control. By mid-morning, the village of Nzuri buzzed with unusual energy. For news had spread of a foreign trader arriving with silks, spices, and mysterious treasures from distant lands, and Adama's heart raced with a mix of anticipation and dread, knowing that her trap was about to be tested. As she adorned herself in the brightest fabrics she owned, her movements deliberate and graceful, a calculated charm in every gesture, while Kofi remained oblivious, tending to his crops with the sweat of honest labor on his brow, unaware that the threads of deceit had begun to entwine their household. And when the traitor finally appeared, a tall man with a finely trimmed beard and eyes that gleamed with curiosity and suspicion, Adama's smile was warm yet elusive, her words honeyed, guiding him subtly toward the hidden charm she had carefully staged behind the carved wooden screens of their hut. And as the traitor leaned closer to inspect the supposed mystical object, the villagers gathered silently, some with wonder, others with barely contained suspicion, sensing that this was no ordinary transaction but a delicate dance of desire and ambition. While Nana Ama watched from the shadows, her lips pressed in a thin line, knowing that the first act of deception had begun to ripple outward, threatening to ensnare the schemer herself. And as the traitor, captivated and slightly unnerved, attempted to negotiate a price for the charm, Adama's mind raced with contingencies, anticipating every question and crafting every answer. Yet she overlooked the subtle tremor in her own hands, the slight hesitation that betrayed her overconfidence. For even as the villagers whispered among themselves, commenting on the odd tension and the unnatural elegance with which Adama orchestrated the encounter, the winds shifted, rustling the banana trees and carrying a scent of wet earth and ripening fruits. And in that moment, a small child, unobserved by all, accidentally kicked over a clay pot near the trader's feet, shattering it into fragments that scattered across the dirt path like shattered illusions. And in the brief instant of startled distraction, the trader caught a glimpse not of the charm itself, but of the carefully arranged props, the staged evidence of wealth and mysticism. And though he concealed his suspicion with a polite nod and a murmured question, his eyes betrayed him, reflecting a glimmer of doubt that crept silently into Adama's plan, a doubt that Nana Ama noted with quiet satisfaction. For the elder had long understood that pride and cunning, when entwined with haste and desire, were the beginning of a trap not only for others but for oneself. And as the sun climbed higher and the shadows of the village shifted along the packed earth paths, the story of Adama's ambition and the trader's curiosity unfolded like a fragile bird's wings, delicate yet dangerously poised, hinting that the next steps she took would determine whether she commanded her destiny or became ensnared by it. For in Inzuri, where every whisper carried weight, the line between hunter and hunted had begun to blur, and the first tendrils of Adama's own entrapment began to curl around her, unnoticed yet inevitable, as the trader, with a polite but wary smile, prepared to leave, leaving behind a tension that vibrated through the village like an unstruck drum, promising that the true test of wit, patience, and consequence was only just beginning. As the sun dipped low behind the forested hills, casting long shadows across the village of Enz, Adama retreated to the solitude of her hut, her mind alive with the thrill of the morning's encounter with the trader. Yet unease coiled silently around her heart, for in the subtle pause of his farewell she had glimpsed hesitation and doubt, the kind that could unravel even the most carefully spun deception. And while she busied herself with preparing the evening meal, arranging yams and fresh herbs with deliberate care, her thoughts drifted to Kofi, who hummed a low tune while repairing a fence outside, oblivious to the storm brewing within his own home, and to Nana Am, whose quiet observation had become an invisible tether that seemed to pull at the edges of Adama's confidence, reminding her that every action carried consequences beyond the immediate, and that the village's eyes were always watching, whether in curiosity, suspicion, or silent judgment. As twilight settled, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples, Adama found herself rehearsing her next move, imagining how she could lure the trader back under the pretense of offering a rare charm imbued with protection and prosperity. And yet, in her scheming, she failed to notice the subtle signs of fatigue and tension threading through her own expressions. The way her hands shook just enough when she carried water from the river, or the small sighs she let slip while arranging offerings at the household shrine, all unnoticed by Kofi, but observed keenly by Nana Ama from her discreet vantage. Who knew that pride often blinds those who believe themselves cleverer than fate itself? That evening, as the villagers gathered around a communal fire to share stories and songs, the air thick with smoke, the scent of roasted millet and cassava mingling with the earthy aroma of the forest, Adama's mind wandered to the trader once more, imagining how she could manipulate his curiosity, even as subtle cracks began to appear in her own plans. For the villagers, though silent, whispered among themselves, noting the unusual energy in her gaze, the way her smile lingered a little too long, the way her movements seemed orchestrated rather than natural. And though no one spoke openly of suspicion, their quiet glances carried the weight of understanding that the trap Adama set was beginning to ensnare her own spirit, as if the forest itself conspired to reflect the consequences of greed and ambition back upon her. By the time darkness fully enveloped Enzuri, lanterns casting flickering light against mud walls, Adama felt a mixture of triumph and apprehension. For while she had carefully laid her snare, she could sense a shift in the invisible balance of power, a subtle tightening of the web she had spun. And as Kofi finally entered the hut, wiping sweat from his brow and calling out a greeting, Adama felt an unfamiliar tremor of doubt, a recognition that her plans might not only ensnare the traitor, but might also trap her own heart and spirit in a maze of desire, fear, and consequence. And outside, under the canopy of stars, Nana Ama's quiet eyes reflected the wisdom of years, knowing that in Zuri, as in life itself, the line between hunter and hunted is never fixed, and that often the one who lays a trap finds themselves caught first, a truth that Adama was only beginning to sense as the night deepened, carrying with it whispers of destiny, cunning, and the inevitable reversal that awaited those who dared to meddle with fate itself. As the moon rose high above the village of Zuri, spilling silver light over the thatched roofs and winding paths, a sense of restless anticipation filled the air, for Adama, unable to sleep, paced her hut while replaying the events of the past day. Each gesture, each glance from the trader, and each whispered conversation with the villagers, all weaving a tapestry of intrigue that both thrilled and unsettled her. And though she had once believed herself the master of her own cunning, a subtle unease began to gnaw at her, like the quiet tapping of a drumbeat she could not fully hear but instinctively feared. Outside, the night carried whispers of the forest leaves rustling, distant calls of nocturnal creatures, and the faint splash of fish leaping in the river which seemed to mirror the tension within her own heart. For every step she had taken to ensnare the traitor now seemed to cast shadows upon her own intentions. And as she approached the hidden charm meticulously staged behind carved screens, she noticed a slight displacement of the objects, a detail so minor that any other person would have missed it. Yet it signaled that fate was quietly testing her control, a test she could neither fully predict nor dominate. Inside the hut, unaware that the threads of deception had already begun to twist around the life they shared, while Nana Ama, seated under the largest baobab tree just beyond the village's edge, watched with eyes like polished obsidian, perceiving every tremor of tension, every flicker of doubt, knowing that the one who sets a trap rarely anticipates the consequences reflected back. And as the hours passed, Adama's mind became a whirlwind of schemes and contingencies, planning how she might invite the traitor to return under the pretense of offering a more potent charm, all the while ignoring the subtle signs that her own actions were unraveling the trust and balance of her household and the village itself. The night deepened, stars scattered across the heavens like pinpricks of fate, and as she finally settled near the firelight that danced across her hut, the wind carried faint sounds, a hushed whisper of footsteps, a shadow slipping past the doorway that made her heart skip, a silent warning that her intricate game had drawn attention not only from outsiders but from forces she could not command. And in the quiet tension of that night, as dreams mingled with fears, Adama felt the first real tremor of consequence, a ripple that hinted her careful manipulations might turn inward, ensnaring her spirit and revealing the vulnerability hidden beneath her elegance and cunning. For in Enzuri, where the forest listens, the river remembers, and the elders see all, the cleverest schemes are never entirely safe from reversal. And by the time dawn tinged the horizon with pale gold, Adama's mind was both sharper and more unsettled, aware that the night had revealed truths she could not undo, and that the next day would demand a courage, insight, and humility she had yet to possess, a reality that Nana, with her knowing smile, had long expected, for the web of desire, deceit, and destiny was tightening, and the first threads of Adama's own entrapment were already winding around her more tightly than she had ever imagined. As the first rays of dawn kissed the village of Enzuri, painting the thatched roofs with warm amber light, Adama felt a strange mixture of triumph and unease, for the traitor, intrigued by her carefully staged charm, had agreed to return that very day, and she meticulously prepared the path, arranging objects, whispering rumors through the marketplace, and donning her most captivating attire. Yet an unfamiliar tension coiled within her chest, a subtle warning she could neither name nor dismiss, for the elder Nana Amma had often spoken of the peril of overconfidence, and though Adama had laughed at such old proverbs, the day's events had begun to hint at their truth. As the traitor approached, escorted by a group of curious villagers, Adama led him through the hut, pointing to the staged charm with honeyed words and graceful gestures. Yet, in the precise moment that she expected him to be fully instant, he paused, eyes narrowing, his gaze flicking not to the charm itself, but to the subtle inconsistencies around it, the misaligned objects, the faint traces of manipulation, the unnatural perfection of the arrangement that screamed of human intent rather than mystical power. And in that instant, a ripple of panic coursed through Adama, for she realized that in her eagerness to trap another, she had left the trail of deception unmistakably visible to an observer of keen perception. The villagers, sensing the sudden shift in the traitor's demeanor, murmured among themselves, some with awe, others with quiet amusement, and even Kofi, drawn by the rising voices, appeared at the doorway, his brow furrowed in confusion, yet unaware of the stakes at play, while Nana Amma, hidden among the banana trees, leaned on her staff with a knowing smile, witnessing the first threads of Adama's own trap begin to coil tightly around her. For the cleverness she had wielded like a blade now became a chain she could not easily escape. As the trader questioned the authenticity of the charm, his polite yet pointed inquiries unraveling the illusion she had spent weeks perfecting, Adama felt a subtle tremor of fear, the realization dawning that she had become the hunted in the very snare she had so carefully constructed. And in the heated moments that followed, as voices rose and hands gestured toward the objects she had staged, the villagers' attention pivoted from curiosity to cautious scrutiny, their quiet observations now a tangible force pressing against her pride and desire. And by the time the sun reached its zenith, casting bright light on the compact village paths, Adama's mind raced with frantic strategies, realizing that the consequences of her ambition were unfolding faster than she could manipulate them. For the balance of power had shifted, the trap she intended for another had subtly reversed, tightening invisibly around her own heart and spirit. And in the silence that followed the trader's careful retreat, only Nana Ama's calm presence and knowing eyes reminded her of the truth she had long ignored, that in Enzuri, as in life, the one who seeks to ensnare often discovers that the threads of fate are woven with a cunning far beyond human design, and that pride, desire, and deception, when left unchecked, have a way of returning to their origin, leaving the schemer to confront the very consequences she had so confidently sought to impose upon others.